So, hardly 2 days into Beijing Biden's presidency, the likes of which he's only enjoying because of the most elaborate election fraud ever in United States history, he's already shown to be an abysmal failure, and I think that trend is going to continue. What a lot of people, the few of them that exist who actually voted for them, don't understand is that as an establishment candidate, he does not give a single shit about the people. So within the first 2 days, just looking at the number of fuck-ups that have gone on, the biggest one that's been the most popular online is his treatment of Army National Guard troops. They were supposedly necessary to fight off QAnon, right-wing, Trump-supporting domestic terrorist sycophants. A totally bullshit way of categorizing Trump supporters, by the way. Obviously, nothing happened, and as soon as the inauguration went off without a hitch, it was literally, hey guys, go chill in the fucking parking garage. That's not a joke. They literally had these guardsmen chilling in a fucking parking garage. So it's like I posted earlier today, it kind of amazes me that people who are fundamentally pawns, that being voters, that being rank and file soldiers, I don't know what the fuck universe you have to live in to sit there and think that the government actually gives a shit about you. One of the things we can thank Trump for is significant amounts of veterans administration reforms, and how many decades did they go on just literally fucking over, ignoring, and kind of shooing soldiers who had fought for the empire aside. So I don't know what planet you have to be on to think that the government actually gives a shit about you, whether or not you're acting in their direct interest or not. So, imagine if Trump had done that. Imagine if Trump had just let a bunch of Army National Guard troops hang out in a fucking parking garage after he cried about how necessary they were during his inauguration. It's more or less crickets from the mainstream media on that one, which is going to be, how it is going forward for Biden as far as media coverage of him is concerned. It's going to be, oh, what's your favorite cupcake? Here's your two dogs that you love. Nobody gives a fuck about that. Never mind that you're just some establishment hack that's working for the big tech billionaires, who are the ones that pulled the real coup, not some motherfuckers that went and sieged the Capitol or what have you. And in that regard, I very rarely see leftists or other people who are addicted to mainstream media propaganda. It's like they freak out over what happened at the Capitol while they pretend like Black Lives Matter was just a cakewalk, when in reality, all the Black Lives Matter riots, on top of being over complete bullshit, were much more deadly, much more costly, much more widespread, were heralded as great by Democratic politicians, and some MAGA folks break some windows at the Capitol. Everybody's nonviolent. A woman gets shot for no reason. Nobody gives a fuck, but that's where we are. So Joe Biden, in his first couple days in office, has already managed to leave National Guard troops out to dry. And he's also fucked over women, because via his executive orders creating this environment where now men can participate in women's sports is absolutely ridiculous. There are only two genders, man and woman. I guess you could sort of come up with a third in between category, but this whole otherkin, third gender, them, they, zezer, it's all just fucking retarded. So this is going to become very apparent when now men are competing in women's sports. There are physiological differences between men and women, especially if it's a sport that has to do with muscle mass being an advantage, of which that kind of tends to be the case for a lot of these sports. So I don't know what fucking planet these people are on. On top of that, Joe Biden was kind enough to end the Muslim travel ban that Trump put into place. I know a lot of idiots on the left talk about how that's xenophobic and racist, but it's like, guys, the United States has spent the greater part of 40 years bombing the shit out of these countries. It really is not a bad idea to say, hey, if you're from Iraq, if you're from Afghanistan, wherever, you can't come here. Because sure, let's say if 1,000 people per month are coming over, most of them will probably be fine. But if you get 2 or 3 people in there who come in here who are bad actors, these sort of lone wolf sleeper cells that they were talking about with ISIS and whatnot back when Obama was in office, that's going to cause real problems. So I'm expecting to see an uptick in domestic terrorism, domestic terror attacks and the like, not all of which will be sort of false flag events by the left to sort of make the right look bad. On top of that, he basically threw the southern border wide open. The funding for the border wall is completely allocated. It's all good to go. Stopped that. I know a lot of people feel like we should help out immigrants and we should help out people from all over the world, but the fact of the matter is the United States isn't a land of magical dirt where when you come here all your problems are suddenly abated. And it's really sad for a lot of the folks that come over here, because they end up, especially if they come illegally, they end up being almost like modern day slaves. They don't have the benefits of citizenship, so they end up working, these ridiculously shit jobs, still paying taxes and whatnot. And it's just another one of these things that happens to benefit the very, very, very upper crust because of the free labor. And on top of that, Biden also wants to start counting illegal immigrants in the census, which is, I think, a form of gerrymandering because the voting patterns of Latin American immigrants especially are quite clear. It's like 60-40 Democrat votes versus Republican votes. So if they can shove a bunch of illegals into a state like Texas, get them counted in the census, then the legislative map is going to be redrawn, and that's going to have a negative effect on folks that have been in this country for several generations, because at the end of the day, demographics are destiny. So we're already having a huge baby bust to begin with. You add the baby bust of COVID on top of that, and it's like these folks that come from these Latin American countries, they're not particularly high IQ. The data is well established. With respect to that fact, on top of the fact that low IQ tends to be heavily correlated with fertility. So now the Americans that make America great, are not having any children and are going to be supplanted by these, immigrants as they come into the country. Again, to no one's benefit except the oligarchs. So, there's also talk of Biden undoing Trump's drawdown of troops in the Middle East. I know a lot of us war hawks, not that I'm one of them, were kind of, I guess, turned off by Trump's actions in the Middle East by kind of withdrawing troops. I assume it's in some way central to the maintenance of the United States empire, but it's like, come on, man, you're supposed to be progressive, you're supposed to be on the left, you're not supposed to be a war hawk, you're not supposed to be shoving more troops over there where they don't need to be. But it's like you go ahead and look at the media coverage of this sort of shit, and it's night and day compared to Trump. I mean, with the Trumps, it was so bad that literally they couldn't do anything right. It was constant coverage of how this is wrong. Everybody seems to forgot about Russia and the Mueller probe bullshit. And at this point, I don't really know what to tell you if you're still sort of involved in this, in just the flat out bullshit that CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all these different, I guess you could call them mainstream content creators, put out there. So I don't even know what the fuck. And then there was supposed to be a big deal about him doing all this legislation to crack down on gun ownership. That's not going to happen almost immediately. It went from we're going to confiscate to now we're just going to tax. And I don't know if you guys know this, but in a lot of states in the United States, if you have a long gun, you don't even have to register it. So how they're going to know who has these guns and who does, it's all just stupid. Never to mind the idea that gun control is fucking retarded. I think it plays into this fantasy land that a lot of leftists tend to come from, especially having grown up in the cities where like they're afraid of guns. They understand that gun violence is a problem, but they don't get that everybody isn't like them, that everybody isn't this fish just swimming along with the mainstream system as a whole. And it's almost as if they fail to understand different issues with it, such that criminals don't care if guns are illegal or not. Like, they constantly bitch at Republicans for making drugs illegal, which was a horrible thing to do, but clearly drugs didn't go anywhere. If anything, it made the problem of drug use worse, which is kind of why I, obviously support all drugs being legalized. So that aside, look at the coverage of what has gone on, or what went on the Capitol. I'm not going to call it a riot. It was more of a siege. I guess that's a better term to use. Where's the media coverage on what Antifa's been doing for the last couple weeks on the left coast? You don't hear about it, do you? Why do you think that is? Moving on to Kamala Harris. A couple days ago, there was a fluff piece. There's just this video of Kamala and all these little black girls just loving it because she's black. So it's like, that's pretty fucking racist, and that's pretty fucking bigoted, because, I mean, imagine the reaction that we'd see from mainstream culture if Trump had a bunch of little white boys that were, going on because, oh, Trump's white, this is great. But that's, the left isn't really about getting rid of actual racism. They're more about fomenting racial tensions to their own benefit. So keep that in mind. But that aside, race aside, why in the ever-loving fuck would you want any little girl to look up to somebody like Kamala Harris? She's a liar, she's an authoritarian, she slept her way to the top. That much is pretty much a fucking fact. And let's not forget that in a great stroke of irony, she herself, as a prosecutor for many years, is responsible for imprisoning shitloads of black people, largely for victimless crimes like drug possession. But we want our little girls, our black little girls, I guess, because white little girls can't be a fan of Kamala Harris because they're not black. But we want people to look up to her. Why? Like, how much sense does that make? Well, it doesn't make any sense. But if you're one of these people that tend to comprise the left, where you don't really care about truth, you don't really have an idea of intellectual consistency, it all just comes down to fundamentally getting along and being, not ostracized. Not that that's, just something that happens on the left. It's a bit more common for sure. But It just doesn't answer the question as to why anybody would want to look up to somebody like that. And especially looking at how, Biden's probably not going to last more than a couple of years. The guy is, if you have two eyes with which to see, it's not exactly a fucking mystery that the guy's demented. It's not exactly a fucking mystery that he has Alzheimer's. So who's going to take over once that gets too bad? Kamala Harris. So now, our first female president, who only got to that position by sleeping around and being a vicious cutthroat bitch, who has also imprisoned shitloads of people for victimless crimes, is now going to be the first African-American and female president who just got in there on a technicality, which I think is pretty poetic, seeing that most of modern feminism is a giant joke. Obviously, women's rights are important, but again, anybody with two brain cells to rub together can see that feminism has not very much to do with equal treatment of men and women. So we're also lacking a lot of coverage of folks like Sarah Palin back when she wanted to be president, or Jo Jorgensen. Nobody gives a fuck about Jo Jorgensen. Why? Because she's a libertarian and this doesn't fit with the dominant what have you. So at the end of the day, if you're just looking up to somebody because of traits, i.e. I'm black, or i.e. I'm white, or I'm pretty, or I'm this, you're a fucking idiot. People are just kind of born with those things. It doesn't really, you want to look up to somebody because of what they've consciously chosen to do, not just, oh, well, she's apparently a strong, independent black woman who just had to sleep with a bunch of men to get to the top, So much for a meritocracy, right? So, yeah, that's about it. So I guess here's to 4 more years of this bullshit, right?